miracle. He made Melania smile. She took nearly a day to acknowledge that she'd lost. It may take her party years to work out why. Here's a tip from Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. Brace yourself, a second Trump White House is on its way. But what will his stunning victory mean for the UK? What could it cost us? We'll talk defence and trade tariffs with the Chancellor's right-hand man, Darren Jones. From Ukraine to Washington, Gaza to NATO. Where will Kemi Badenoch's Conservatives fall in line with the government? We'll ask her new shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. The UK is ready for war, but it needs a stronger military. That's the message from the head of the armed forces, Admiral Sir Radakin, sitting down with this programme for Remembrance Sunday. And just how did the White House slip through the Democrats' fingers? As the post-mortems begin, we'll hear from Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, one of the states Kamala Harris narrowly held. And an A-list panel is here throughout the show. Broadcaster and host of the Newsagents podcast, Jon Sopel. CNN's chief international anchor, Christiane Amanpour. And former number 10 Chief of Staff to Theresa May, Fiona Hill. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the midst of all the pomp and circumstance to come, it's easy to lose sight of why today matters. Let me put it this way. Every week in this studio, we talk to and about the most powerful people in our own country. Some of the things we say aren't always that complimentary. We may even indulge in a little light mockery of our own and other nations' rulers. The Global Campaign for Media Freedom Index on Censorship reminds us regularly that in many countries across the world, such behaviour would earn us a spell behind bars, or worse. So far, here, nobody's turned up with handcuffs. It's not empty sentiment to remember that millions have sacrificed their lives defending the people's right to ridicule our kings, to ask awkward questions of our lawmakers, and ultimately to throw our leaders out of office. The grim death struggle in Ukraine should remind us that most people in the world don't have that privilege. Later this morning, we'll turn to Sky's coverage of the ceremonials at the Cenotaph. Many of you will bow your heads at your local memorial. So let's spend the next 90 minutes making sure that the sacrifice we'll be recalling was worth making. A little earlier, I spoke to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. Chief Secretary, thanks for joining us. Let's start with something from the past. Can you remember when you wrote these words? It says here, a Republican candidate as repugnant as Donald Trump spells a much longer-term problem for the centre-left of politics than it does just for the outcome of this presidential term. Can you remember that?
2016, the year before I was elected as a Member of Parliament, and look, we can all go through line by line what people have said in the past.
Indeed, it's well remembered. You were sitting in a bar after a week's hard campaigning for Hillary Clinton. And the thing that strikes me is that you were very prescient, actually. Donald Trump is going to be a problem for quite a long time. Why hasn't the centre-left found an answer?
Hey, that's a big question. I mean, you're right that President-elect Trump won decisively in the United States. The Electoral College, the popular votes, the Senate, the House of Representatives. And, you know, it's for the Democratic Party, Labour Party's sister party, to make sure they really understand why voters are voting for the other team and not for ours. I mean, I think it's a deep question. My observation from a UK perspective is that, you know, people want a government that can deliver tangible benefits for them in their communities. And it's no good just pointing to OBR graphs, maybe, and saying, you know, these forecasts look great. We've got to make sure as a government here in the UK that people feel the benefit of the change that we promised, and that's what we're working to deliver.
Well, you're right to mention the forecasts, which for you, frankly, don't look that terrific. You've had to downgrade your expectations of growth, for example, which is your central mission.
Well, the downgrade, without getting too into the weeds, was a comparison with the OBR forecast under the last Conservative government.
Back in March.
Which the OBR has said, had they had all the information transparently from the Conservative Party at the time, their forecast would have been materially different. So you can't compare March to the latest forecast, but there is growth forecasted in the OBR projections over the next 5 years. We welcome that. It's more growth than we've had in the past 5 years, but do we want more? Absolutely we do. That's why Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, in her Mansion House speech this week will be talking about how we're going to be going after growth in the years ahead.
All right, well, let's see if we can match up growth with your responsibility, which is spending, that is to say, making sure that the extra money that you've raised in taxes ends up in the right place at the right time. Today we're thinking a lot about defence spending, of course, and you said that you want to get it to 2.5%. Chief of Defence Staff says that's going to happen, but doesn't know when. Can you help us out? When are you going to hit that number? And where's the extra, what, 6, 7 billion going to come from?
Yeah, so we made a commitment in our manifesto at the election to reach 2.5% of GDP on defence spending. We're currently at around 2.3%. But the when question will be answered when the Strategic Defence Review has concluded. This is the big review the Defence Secretary is doing at the moment to understand what we need to buy and what our priorities are in the world. And then that has to align to the spending decision. So I'll be able to answer that question probably in the spring of 2025 once those reviews have concluded.
Well, one of your colleagues has already more or less given an answer, and I want to remind you of this. Chief of Defence Staff has told us that he wants armed forces to be stronger. 5 days after your general election victory, the Armed Forces Minister, Luke Pollard, said that you would not increase military spending without growing the economy. Now, does that mean that the anemic rates of growth, which are being projected by the OBR, are putting our national security at risk? Or to put it the other way, we don't get more national security until your hopes of growth are realised?
So a bit of both. So Luke is right to point out that the way to generate more money for public services, whether it's defence spending or other areas of spending, is to get the economy performing well. That's why we talk about growth all of the time. And there are growth, you called them anemic. I welcome the growth figures. As I say, we should...
1.5%, pathetic.
Well, on average over the forecast period, it's higher than that. But as we've already agreed, we'd like more, and that's what we're working to deliver. But that doesn't mean that you don't spend what you need to spend on defence right now. We've already increased the defence budget by about £3 billion in the budget last week. Ministry of Defence spends between kind of 50 and 60 billion pounds a year, and there are big questions about how we spend that to match the priorities that we face as a country. That's what the Strategic Defence Review is working on.
But what's the principle here? Foreign Secretary says he agrees with Mr. Trump that we're not spending enough. Does the government want to spend more money irrespective of growth, or is it entirely dependent on getting that growth figure up?
So it's government policy that we want to get to 2.5%. And then the question is how? And as we've just talked about, there's a trade-off there between new money coming in the door and that going on.
So we've got to wait until we see whether your growth plans work? Before we can spend on more defence?
Well, as I say, the Strategic Defence Review will align with the spending review that I now have to run, reporting in the spring. And we'll make the decisions about the current budget and how that's spent. We'll confirm the date of the trajectory to 2.5 next year. But you're right, if there's new money coming in the door because the economy is performing well, then that will go against our manifesto commitments, one of which is 2.5%.
I mean, this is a very interesting point, and you're very clear about it. For you, it's a trade-off. In the Kremlin and Beijing, they don't have that sort of... They don't make that kind of equation. They simply say, we have to spend whatever we need to defend our country. We are essentially putting national security at the mercy of the economic winds.
No, national security is a foundation for this government, as it should be for...
So why not say that come what may, we're going to hit the 2.5%, we'll find the money from somewhere else?
Well, that may be one of the decisions in the future, but today we're spending 2.3%. The question is how you spend that. But defending the country is a non-negotiable. That is not a trade-off. The trade-off is then with other areas of public spending.
Okay.
Now, are we defending the country today? Absolutely we are. Do we want to make sure we're hitting our NATO obligations? Absolutely we do. But the Strategic Defence Review will start to answer some of the questions, which is beyond that. What more does the UK want to offer as part of our global alliances? And that's where you start to think about new.
Okay, well, let's talk about the other areas of spending, or indeed, let's stay for a moment with defence. We don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine, but if the Americans stop or reduce funding to Mr. Zelensky, as Mr. Trump has implied, are we going to step up to the plate? Will we replace the billions that the Americans are spending?
Well, it's a hypothetical question, so you'll forgive me for not answering.
Well, Mr. Trump hasn't been that hypothetical. He's pretty clear.
Sure, but we're going to continue to work with the Biden administration until the inauguration on current American policy bases. That aligns with our position in the UK, where we want to support Ukraine, that our support for Ukraine is resolute. We don't want any countenance of the idea that we're stepping back from that. That's why we're offering them £3 billion a year, which, you know, in the fiscal context here in the UK is difficult, but the right decision for us. But you'll forgive me for not answering hypothetical questions about future foreign policy scenarios.
Yeah, but it's part of your job to look forward into the future and get us prepared for that. Are you prepared? Do you have the insight? Have you done the modelling to work out what we might do if the Americans retreat?
So officials will be considering and planning lots of different scenarios, as they would do under any administration, to make sure that the UK is in the strongest possible position.
And the Americans winding down their support is one of those possible scenarios.
Well, at the moment, that is not American policy. And of course, when President-elect Trump comes into office, we'll be engaging with them to understand if and how their policy will be changing. All
right. Well, let me ask you about something about which President-elect has been even clearer. He wants to impose tariffs, particularly on Chinese goods, but he's been pretty straightforward. He wants to impose tariffs on imports to America from all over the world, which presumably includes us. Have you got the Treasury working on what that would mean for us?
Well, you were right to allude in your question that there was a presumption in the assertions you were making. Much like with defence spending, of course, officials will be considering lots of different scenarios. But the position of the government is that we support free trade and we support the trading relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. It's a very strong, very fruitful relationship, both for us, but also for the American economy. And of course, we want to protect that and strengthen it in the years ahead. And I think President-elect Trump has said that. I mean, he recognises the important relationship the US has with the UK, and that's the basis on which we will be cooperating in future years.
Yeah, but Mr. Trump is a businessman, as everybody keeps telling us, and sentiment is not part of the Trump lexicon. If he decides that that's what he wants to do, you're not going to tell me you're going to wait until he decides to say, this is what we're going to do, to say what we might do. What are you planning in the event that Mr. Trump says, OK, we won't treat you like China, but we're going to treat you like the rest of the world, and there will be tariffs on imported British goods. What's your plan?
You'll have to forgive me, Trevor. I'm not a commentator, I'm a cabinet minister. As I've said, it's appropriate for officials to plan for different scenarios, but you are asking me to comment on sensitive, hypothetical future scenarios. It would not be appropriate for me to give you my personal view about that. But what it is appropriate for me to say is that, of course, our relationship is important. The UK government will work with the new American administration, and we will try to understand what decisions President-elect Trump's administration will take.
You say it's not appropriate, but just very quickly, the markets watch these interviews.
Yeah, exactly.
And a cabinet minister who says, well, we really don't quite know what we'd do if we were hit with tariffs, is not inspiring confidence. It's not what you said. So you do have a view. You're just not telling me.
What I'm telling you is that the government prepares for all scenarios and will work with our American counterparts in the normal way. But it's important not to put words in my mouth, especially when the markets are watching.
All right. Well, let's see if we can arrive at something which might make people feel a bit more confident. Given you need some help here, possibly. Given that all the things that Labour people have said about Mr. Trump, would it be wise to take advantage of Nigel Farage's offer to be an intermediary for our government with the Trump White House?
Look, it's not for me to advise Mr. Farage about his career options.
No, I'm not asking you to advise him. I'm asking you whether you take advantage of his offer.
I think that's
it's free.
I think that's probably unlikely. My advice to Mr. Farage would be he might want to concentrate his efforts on the constituents in Clacton that elected him into office as opposed to spending his time in the United States of America.
Well, you know, OK, I'm laughing about it, but there is a serious point here. Your leader has said time and time again, I remember it from his conference speech, we will always put country before party. Mm-hmm. Man comes along, it might be a different party, and he says, I can help you. And it's manifest he can help you. He is close to Trump. Trump listens to him because Trump tells the world that he listens to Nigel Farage. Why would you snub the offer of help? That's a help for the country, unless you're putting now your party's interests and dislike of Mr. Farage before the country's interests.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Farage will be pleased you're making the case for him. I mean, look, the counterfactual here is that we do not have influence and we do not have relationships. That's just not true. Karen Pierce, our ambassador in the United States, the team, the foreign secretary, people that work in government here in Westminster have got relationships with President-elect Trump, Vice President-elect
Yeah, but none of them gets invited to Mar-a-Lago. None of them gets photographed in Trump Tower. Why don't you use this man who's offering you help?
As I say, I think he should focus on working with his constituents in Clacton who deserve a bit of a full-time MP as opposed to transatlantic commentator.
OK, well, let's talk about what you're doing here. We are still in the first moments of sorting out the legislative fallout from the budget. You've got to have finance bill and all of that. You hit employers and country with a 40 billion tax rate when you promised you wouldn't. This week you increased tuition fees when your leader once promised to abolish them. The OBR and Bank England say that the budget's going to keep inflation higher than it would otherwise have been. Do you understand why it's hard for people to believe in the promise of sunny uplands?
Well, I think it's important to deal with the fact. I mean, inflation is close to target at 2%, and the long-term forecast for inflation is strong. And by the way, very, very different to the 11% that we hit under the Conservatives when they were last in government and lost control of the economy. No, but this is all stuff that you've done. Sure, but I'm just answering the points you've made. So inflation was one. The second was on tuition fees. I think you were alluding to something that the Prime Minister said many, many years ago before the Conservatives crashed the economy. If you're going to scrap tuition fees, you have to pay for it. That isn't a priority right now, given that we're short of money. And shall I just deal with the first one that you raised, which I think was about the tax bill? We made a commitment in the election not to increase taxes on working people. That meant income tax and employer national insurance, as well as VAT and corporation tax for business. We've honoured that promise, but we needed to raise taxes in order to deal with the black hole that we inherited from the Conservatives. Okay. So I do think those are promises that have clearly been honoured, and I think voters can see that. We will no doubt be talking about those promises again and again. Chief Secretary, thank you for your time this morning. My pleasure. So let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the broadcaster and host of the News Agents podcast, Jon Sopel, CNN's chief international anchor, Christiane Amanpour, and the former chief of staff to Theresa May, Fiona Hill. John, one thing that we are probably as clear as we are about anything else is that to Donald Trump, tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language, and there's no evidence that we're going to get the special treatment. How big a deal is it?
It would be a very big deal for British exporters. I mean, post-Brexit, we still don't have a trade deal with the US. I'm told that when Keir Starmer met Donald Trump and they had dinner in his private apartment in September, there was some discussion of it, but not a huge amount. It was referred to in their most recent chat when Starmer rang to congratulate Donald Trump on the victory. Apparently, Trump said to him, look, we're going to disagree on some things, but we're friends. That was the emphasis, that these are friendly nations. But the person, it looks like Donald Trump's going to appoint, Lighthizer, was the guy who was there in the first term. He is Mr. Tariffs. Tariffs are inflationary within America, and they could precipitate a trade war. So we know what the language is at the moment. As ever with Donald Trump, we don't know what the follow-through looks like and whether he is going to go ahead with this, which could have, really jolt the markets and make it more difficult for British exporters to get their goods into the United States.
Christiane, what are you reading in the runes from what you saw before?
Well, look, I think that what you have is now the whole idea of an alliance led by a nation that believes in the rule of law. That's in question. I think you have a new authoritarian world order, which has suddenly been jump-started and helped by the fact that, from what he says, let's just say what he says, the United States is now going to be led by a much more authoritarian, populist and nationalist leader. So that is comfort, as they've already said, China, Russia, all the others who believe in that. I think that it is going to be very different from the post-1945 world order that the US and Britain and everybody else created. It's a completely different life we live in, or world we're going to live in. Again, backed by the most powerful country in the world, the United States. He's already said, as Jon says, that, his foreign policy is protectionism and potentially isolationism. He's not an alliance lover. He's an alliance skeptic. That means NATO. That means all the, the Pacific alliances, all the rest of it. And in-house, at home, he has announced that he will be the deregulation and deportation president. So you've got all of that. Look at the front pages of your own newspapers. Sunday Times has said that the first thing is going to be a mass deportation. His guy who was in charge of it last time, we'll see how it pans out, but they want to use the military for that.
You weren't hanging out the bunting then, were you, Chris?
No, look, I think you have to be clear-eyed. I think all of us are going to be observing and honestly reporting on what this new world order looks like. I think you have to be clear-eyed.
Fiona, coming back to Darren Jones on trade, do you think they ought to be a bit better prepared for what's possible, or is he just not telling me?
I think that they are in government and they don't have to tell journalists everything all of the time. They have to do the work of government.
Yeah,
I'm terribly sorry about that.
I'm shocked.
But I want to pick up on the points that we've made about this new world order. And the interesting thing to me is Elon Musk, who really does actually understand the new world order. Space, for example. In space, he's huge. He's bigger than governments. He owns Tesla, a company based on electric vehicles that relies on critical minerals from Africa. And he will be telling this to Donald Trump. I mean, there's a stat which I've come across where, if China decided to stop exporting those critical minerals, Tesla would close down within 5 weeks. So, it's not... When he was president the last time round, things were very, very different. Things have moved on.
This is a very interesting point. I mean, Musk is clearly very influential. I mean, he's
the most powerful non-elected person in America.
And he's unelected
but
power,
here's the thing,
money.
he is the most powerful person on issues of the new generation. Space is huge. What's happening in space at the moment, and I hope that the government looks at this in their defence review. Up there at the moment, there's something like 10,000 satellites in LEO. In 18 months, that will increase to 30,000. And Trump understands how to do deals. He does, whether we like it or not. And more importantly, let's remember, he did win decisively.
I've literally just come back from Washington off the plane this morning. The thing I was getting, and let's see what it turns out to be. There are those people in Washington who are saying they think it will be different this time round, that Donald Trump will be much more conscious about his legacy. He is not irritated by people saying you didn't win the election. He won the election fair and square. It's all on his shoulders. He hasn't yet got confirmed control of the House, but that looks like it's going to be there. The Senate's in his hands. The Supreme Court has a Conservative majority. If Donald Trump wants to achieve these things, it's in his gift to do so.
Can we just say about Elon Musk, because we're part of the press, Elon Musk has a platform called X. He's a brilliant space entrepreneur. He's a brilliant clean battery, Tesla entrepreneur, but he's not a politician. And he has taken X and he has used it as a weapon to bash actual truth. Sorry, he has, in his algorithms,
Well, of course,
have gone hard right.
He would say that
we know that that's not true.
About freedom of expression.
Did you see what he did to your own government during the riots?
Well,
I mean, come on.
I think the key thing for me, as we bridge ourselves into a new world order, is that the biggest country in the world, which is a Western liberal democracy, has stability in its system. And that stability is something to build on. And so for me, I just want to give him a bit of time, and it will be different this time round because he's been president before. He has a team behind him. He didn't have a team behind him before beyond, Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner. So I just say let's give him a chance.
Sorry, he had so-called grown-ups behind him.
One very quick thing, that when Trump had a call with Zelensky in the past couple of days, who was on the call? Elon Musk, which is a highly unusual.
I know a little bit about that call.
Not that unusual, because actually what he's doing in space has implication for what he does on the warfields.
The thing that is also becoming clearer is that he's got a pretty fixed view on what he does on Ukraine and all of that. We hear this morning that Mike Pompeo, who people think of as Trump adjacent, but sort of more in the conventional mould of an American politician, is not going to be part of the administration.
Nor Nikki Haley.
Or nor Nikki Haley. What do we think all of this means for defence and what we should be doing if he starts to pull the plug?
Look, your own former head of MI6 said this week, and the former Ukrainian defense minister said to me, guys, please don't make a mistake. This is not about villages and a little bit of territory in eastern Ukraine. What this is about is the existential future of Ukraine. Will Ukraine be and remain part of the democratic leaning West, or will it be forced into, quote, neutrality or into the Russian bloc? In which case, the game is over for Ukraine and it brings Putin much more power. And that is what people have to consider right now. Not talking about a village here and a village there, according to your MI6 former chief and the Ukrainian former defense minister. It's a much bigger existential situation which affects all of Europe and the West.
For Donald Trump to get some resolution in Ukraine, the single most important thing that he would need to do is to persuade Zelensky to draw back from asking for membership of NATO. That is the main thing for Putin. It's the thing one of the things that led to the invasion in the first place. Basically, that's what he needs to do if he wants to draw this to an end. And whether or not Zelensky is willing to take that offer is anyone's guess.
Surely
that's a surrender. That's a surrender.
Surely that depends on what Trump is going to tell Putin he has to do to get that commitment from Zelensky. If it is that Putin, you can keep the gains that you've made, but Ukraine can't join NATO.
From 2014, that means Crimea and Donetsk go.
Exactly.
There has to be a proper security deal that the West decides it's going to support.
But to be clear,
Ukraine.
Putin will never allow Ukraine into NATO, and that I firmly believe that.
Okay. It is coming up to 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Treasury Minister, Darren Jones, has told this programme that the British government supports free trade. He refused to discuss how we'd respond if Donald Trump imposes new trade tariffs. And his response to Nigel Farage's offer of diplomatic help with the president-elect? Thanks, but no thanks. Well, lots still to come this morning. In a moment, we'll be joined live by the new Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel. As the UK falls silent later for Remembrance Sunday, the head of the armed forces tells this programme we need a stronger military to deal with a more dangerous world. We'll hear from Admiral Sir Tony Radakin shortly. And is the world ready for the return of President Trump? We'll dissect why he won and why Kamala Harris lost with the Democratic governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy. This time last week, Kemi Badenoch's tenure as leader of the opposition had barely begun. Now her shadow cabinet is fully in place. But there's still precious little glimpse of the policy platform her Conservatives will adopt. Let's try to get some clarity here and now. I'm joined by the new Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. Congratulations.
Morning, Trevor. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Are you glad to see the return of Donald Trump to the White House?
Well, America's clearly a very strong ally to our country, and I think it's good. He's got a clear mandate, a clear result, and there's a lot of speculation previously about the outcome of this election. That's decided, and I can tell you now that we are here to congratulate Donald Trump with his election, and we want to see a really strong and good, constructive working relationship between our two countries all over again.
OK, so you're happy to see the Donald back. What lesson do you think your new leader should take from Mr. Trump's victory?
Well, I think first and foremost, this is all about our relationship. We have a long-standing history between our two countries. And, certainly I'm from the generation that saw the Cold War come to an end with the work between Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. But look at today. Today's Remembrance Sunday. It was Churchill and Roosevelt that actually built that post-war consensus after the Second World War. We live in a dangerous world. And right now, this is where we have to come together to really fight off the aggressors, but look at the economic prosperity of the world and security. And I did actually work with the previous Trump administration when I was Home Secretary, and we did a great deal of work on national security, all those equities that matter to our two countries, and we must continue to not just develop that, but grow that. And we are living in such an era of instability now. This should concentrate all our minds and make us really trust each other and respect each other in a new way.
Just by the way, we talked about hypotheticals with Darren Jones, but of course, the hypothetical is that Kamala Harris could have won. You talked about long-standing relationship. Would it have been the same if she'd won?
I think the dialogue and discussion would be much the same. The geopolitical world is, full of tension right now, and the need for greater working together, greater partnerships, strategic alliances, particularly on defence. And I don't know if you've shown your video yet with Tony Radakin, but, I think he's speaking sense when it comes to the challenges that we are facing. We've got Russia-Ukraine taking place. Look at the issues that we see in the Middle East. These are challenges that we all face, not just abroad, but at home when it comes to our economic prosperity, security, cost of living, as we've seen in recent years. That's why we must work with our allies.
Darren Jones made a rather interesting point and was admirably clear. He said that essentially there is a trade-off between economic growth and the amount that we can spend on national security to respond to, for example, Tony Radakin's call for a stronger military. Is he right that that's just the reality of government, that sometimes you have to sacrifice or wait to be able to build up your national armed forces, depending on your economic circumstance?
Absolutely not. These are political choices that this government have chosen to make. I mean, we could talk about the budget, but the reality is, even when it comes to defence spending, my party in government had a clear pathway to securing that 2.5% of GDP by 2030. Today we're reading potential reports that this government, we understand they've got a strategic defence review taking place, and that's right and proper, but they may not even seek to reach that level until 2034. The world is in an unstable place. We've seen in the last 3 weeks as well, the BRICS countries come together. The landscape is shifting dramatically now in terms of where aggressors are, the type of challenges that we face. I think we need a stronger West right now, and it's imperative that the West in particular unites around defence spending, how we cooperate in NATO, the level of resources that we put in. We have been supporting Ukraine rightly, but also that has domestic implications for our own military and our own capacity, and actually recruitment and retention. These are areas that we must be discussing and looking at now.
One of the clear implications, which Mr. Trump set out, I guess, in his campaign, was that there may be less support, or less full-throated support, I guess, for Ukraine. If the Americans wind down their support for Ukraine, what should we do?
Well, I think, first of all, my party was a party in government that gave absolute support to Ukraine in terms of the military effort, but also putting out the hand of friendship to the people of Ukraine. We stand by that. We don't know what Trump is going to do, and I appreciate that we can speculate and have discussions, and we do have to think about this going forward. One thing I would say is that we do have to work with America on this. We can't do this on our own. We have to work with our European friends and allies as well. Europe has spent billions in this collective effort. We have to find joint solutions to these shared problems. This isn't a problem for one country versus another country. This is actually about the security of us all, the defence of our own freedoms, and therefore I would gently suggest that we have to work together on these solutions.
Indeed, but the reality is that the United States may make a choice that says, actually, for example, there's a deal to be made here, and we are going to require the Ukrainians to trade land for peace. Are we going to work with the Americans to do that, or are we going to stick with what we've always said to the Ukrainians? You decide what the deal is.
Well, I will be encouraging this government to have constructive dialogue with our American counterparts on this, because
but what's our body language? What should our body language be?
Well, first of all, our body language to America has to be one of building trust and respect. And if I may just make the point, our chief diplomat, David Lammy, has not exactly been... he's not been full of warm and generous words, I think it's fair to say, historically, to President-elect. And these relationships...
He's saying that's all old news. Why are you bringing it up?
Well, Trevor, that is I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, diplomatic relationships are based on respect and trust. And America is a key ally of ours. And if they're going to listen to us, and if we're going to have constructive engagement, a good starting point would be to have that trusted relationship, one of mutual respect and understanding, so we can influence the outcomes that we would like to see for both Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, and equally as importantly, the freedoms that we are constantly trying to defend right now. The Western world has not been in a strong position, and this is our chance now to collectively to regroup and to rebuild and demonstrate that we will not tolerate the type of aggression that we have seen in Ukraine.
Would it help to build up that atmosphere of trust if we were to engage Mr. Nigel Farage, who has offered to be an intermediary between our government and the White House?
That's a choice for the Prime Minister, but in all fairness...
What would you advise him to do?
We should... I'm not here to advise Keir Starmer, definitely not. I'm working for my leader, Kemi Badenoch. But importantly, where we have good links with America, good, strong relationships, we should be building upon those. And I fundamentally believe that. I had a very constructive working relationship with my counterparts in the last Trump administration. There are many of us that have worked with his previous administration. These are the strong foundations that we had put in place. We need to build upon them. And by the way, Trevor,
I'm
that equally...
about it, but it is a serious point. Mr. Nigel Farage can lay claim to be Donald Trump's most trusted ally in this country. Why won't any of you say, why don't we take advantage of Farage's close relationship?
Well, look, he has that relationship and friendship, and that is important. That is really important. Nigel, by the way, is an elected politician in Westminster and should be respected for that as well. I've always said that about Nigel. You know, that's very important. He's democratically elected. What I would say, the President-elect Trump is very sympathetic to the United Kingdom. He has familial ties with this country. My party has a very strong working relationship with him previously. I want us to grow that, strengthen that, and demonstrate that the West is not vacating the pitch when it comes to security issues, economic issues, but importantly, Trevor, the defence of our freedoms.
Dame Priti Patel, thank you very much for your time this morning. Well, OK. Well, if you haven't had enough Westminster, you can check out our Daily Politics podcast. If you scan the QR code on your screen now, it'll take you to Politics at Jack and Sam's. They'll set you up with all the politics you need to know for the day ahead, and you get it all in under 20 minutes. And don't forget that we will have full coverage of Remembrance Day commemorations straight after this programme. My colleague Alistair Bruce will be doing commentary, and we'll bring you pictures from all corners of the country, including from the Cenotaph, where the King is going to be leading events. That's going to be here on Sky News from 10:30 onwards. Right, let's go back to our panel. Jon Sopel, Christiane Amanpour and Fiona Hill. Fiona, I think Priti Patel was, it's quite interesting there. What should be the opposition's body language towards Trump and the government? Now, they can make mischief about, what David Lammy might have said and so on and so forth. But it's quite a tricky job for them right now, isn't it?
Well, being in opposition, obviously you don't get to see the intelligence briefings that you get in government. So it's very difficult, as David Lammy will remember himself from being Shadow Foreign Secretary, to really have a very, very informed, deeply informed position. But what you can do is obviously have the door open. And, it wasn't that long ago that they were in government, so they do have those links. The one thing that Priti mentioned about Nigel Farage, I mean, that's a friendship, but that's different from being a diplomat. It's different from having the role of a diplomat, which is a vital role at a time when there's so many things changing at the same time across the globe. It makes me laugh because actually at one point I was sent to Washington the last time round to tell Reince Priebus, who was then Trump's chief of staff, that there was no way in the world that we'd have Nigel Farage in any way involved. And I was happy to give that message.
Right. By the way, actually, of everybody who's on the show today, you've probably been closer to Donald Trump than anybody else. I'll ask the obvious question.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Well, I mean, we had a whole day with him in the White House. I thought that when we did the closed security briefing that he was on top of all the detail, and bearing in mind this was only a day after the inauguration, and he was on it. And I think he's naturally an emotional man. It may well be because his mother is Scottish. We're all emotional people. And in fact, his mother is actually MacLeod, and my middle name is MacLeod. So one of the first things he said to me was, "We could be related." And I said, "Well, maybe, never know." But look, that was a long time ago, really, and a lot has happened since then. And we can all just hope, because actually these are troubled times, that he steps up to the mark and that we have a stable America that can play its role as the world's place.
The thing that struck me listening to Priti Patel was I thought she was holding kind of the door ajar to the idea that Nigel Farage plays some kind of role. I don't know what, though. I mean, what is the role?
He's not going to provocateur.
He's not going to be the ambassador.
No.
So what is the role? Kind of an envoy, emissary? I just don't see how it would work in practice.
Yeah.
And also, Nigel Farage's interests are not necessarily the same as Keir Starmer's interests, and it would take a leap of trust. And I just kind of look forward to the backbench meeting of the PLP, where Keir Starmer goes to explain why Nigel Farage has just been given.
I actually think it'd be more likely that Boris Johnson has a role.
Yep.
He's a former Prime Minister. He was deep in Ukraine. I think Nigel Farage is a sideshow. I think that there is a higher likelihood of Boris actually having some kind of serious role.
The last thing Priti Patel said to you was a relationship also based on a strong commitment by America to defend security interests and defense interests that we all believe in. And it comes back to my first point earlier on and what you're talking about right now. Yes, Boris Johnson was very much in Ukraine's camp to defend Ukraine. And this is going to be the single biggest test of the NATO alliance and Europe's new the European liberal democracy, whatever rules of the road, world order going through. If they lose Ukraine, i.e., of course you want peace. Of course this war has to end. But if it is on terms that essentially is a dressed-up surrender, it means that Putin has won in Europe, period, end of story. And people like Poland and the Baltics and all of those in Moldova. So I think that's going to be super interesting.
I want to come back to talk about the art of the deal on Russia and Ukraine in the final part. But coming up, the head of the armed forces sits down with this programme to talk about Remembrance Sunday.
First Minister. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Very
Nice
much,
to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it? The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Later this morning, the nation will honour a century-old tradition when it falls silent to remember those we've lost in war. Remembrance Sunday is as resonant today as ever, at a time when more of the world is in conflict than at any point since the Second World War. It's a dangerous world, but are the armed forces fit for the fight, should it arise? I sat down with the man in charge, Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Radakin. Admiral, why is Remembrance Sunday still important?
So I think it's incredibly important on a number of levels. So the first one is the way that the nation comes together to pay our respects for our predecessors and what they achieved on our behalf. And I think the scale of that reflection, the fact that it's not just in London, It's in every town, every city, across all the nations of the United Kingdom. And then that's also reflected across the world, and particularly for the military. Every unit will have their moment of reflection. And that's literally over 10,000 people deployed across the world in over 50 countries and at sea around the world on over 50 operations. And for us, I think it's also an element of responsibility. The responsibility that we maintain the freedoms that these amazing people achieved on our behalf and with their sacrifice. And that's what we do every day on behalf of the nation.
Let's talk about continuing to protect those freedoms, those values. We probably have fewer men and women under arms at any time, probably for a century, I guess. How concerned are you about our ability to muster and project force in the size and the quality that the nation might need?
So I think when we look at it, the quality of our men and women is outstanding, and the commitment and their level of service, again, is extraordinary. So that we should take a lot of comfort from that. Then if you look at us as a nation, we're a P5 nation, we're the strongest European partner of NATO, we're a nuclear power. And what that means is that every day the Prime Minister has a nuclear deterrent at sea that he knows is ready to respond in the worst circumstances. But the Prime Minister also knows that we're part of the world's strongest ever military alliance called NATO. And NATO's got even stronger, growing from 30 nations to 32 nations. And then when you look at the UK's role, well, we're a strong partner alongside our allies. So we're strong with our army, so we're deployed in Estonia, we're deployed on NATO's eastern flank, we're looking to be even stronger in the future. We're strong with our Air Force that conducts air policing, again, on behalf of other countries in NATO to make sure the whole alliance stays safe. And our Navy ensures that we have what we call freedom of manoeuvre in the North Atlantic. Now, when we project some of the threats that we're facing, we're also saying we need to be even stronger in the future. And that's the piece. So we're strong now, but can we be even stronger in the future?
I want to talk to you about the alliance, but just for the moment, let's talk about our part in that alliance and whether we can actually play our part. Secretary of State for Defence said recently that he thought we aren't necessarily ready to fight a war at scale. Can you say confidently that Britain could fight a war at scale, that we could play our part as advertised and as our partners expect?
Absolutely. So our servicemen and women will always be ready to serve their nation and to do as the government of the day directs us to do.
If they have the capabilities.
And we do have the capabilities. And then the reassurance is that we do that alongside our allies. And for those biggest fights, then we will always do them with our allies. But we're also being honest in saying we need to be even stronger in the future. So some of that is about having deeper stockpiles. Some of that is being better at bringing technology in, learning the lessons from Ukraine so that we can continue to have an advantage over our potential enemies. And some of that is also recognizing that you need to have a defense industry that can better support those demands. We're in a more dangerous world. This government has been really clear about that. The previous government was really clear about that. That means we need to strengthen our armed forces.
Well, you have actually been pretty optimistic about the prospects of victory in Ukraine, but post the American elections, how confident are you that America will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine? Because unless they do stick to what's been done thus far, exactly all you've been saying about the power of the alliance actually disappears, doesn't it?
it would be wrong for me to speculate less than a week after the results of a US election about US policy and how that might change in the future. But if I talk about where we are at present, what you're seeing is a Russia that is making tactical gains and is seizing more territory, but it's doing that at enormous cost. Enormous cost in terms of its soldiers, and over 1,500 people a day either killed or wounded in October. Enormous cost in terms of its economy, having to reshape its economy, so 40% of its public spending is now on defence and security. And at the strategic level, Russia is losing. Russia wanted a smaller NATO, it's got a larger NATO. Russia wanted to subjugate Ukraine, it's never going to subjugate Ukraine. And that's what we should be really clear about, that we continue our support for President Zelensky and his people in their existential fight, and they're the ones that are seeking our continued support.
But in the end, it will carry on the fight. And what Zelensky himself says is that actually we're supplying him and supporting him to the extent that he doesn't lose, but not to the extent that he can ever see the prospect of victory. In the end, as Mr. Trump seems to be implying, there's going to have to be a deal, isn't there?
So I think we've always been clear that when we talk about this coming to an end, that's for the government of Ukraine to determine. And in the meantime, we continue to support Ukraine. And that support from the UK, from the international community, has got even stronger.
But let's talk about Chancellor. She talked about getting to 2.5% of GDP on defence. We are nowhere near that. I think it would take another 15 to 20 billion pounds. Are we and our partners in Europe spending as much as we should, or is Mr. Trump right that we are, to some extent, free riding on the United States?
So we're very close to 2.5% because we're just over 2.3% at the moment. The government has laid it as part of its manifesto that it will grow to 2.5%. There will be a debate as to when that materialises. And part of that debate is a strategic defence review that's ongoing at the moment.
It's going to report next spring.
That report's early in the new year. That's the point at which we take stock of these threats that we face. We look at our armed forces and what they currently constitute. How do we best organise those for the future? What equipment do we need for the future? And that's the process to take stock of these big movements. And is that about a Europe spending more on defence? Is that about responding to some much more challenging threats? And how do you do that as a whole?
Let me just turn, if I may, lastly to, if you like, morale and conduct within the armed forces. When you were head of the Navy, you put a high priority on tackling bullying. I read in some remarks that you made that you thought that the level of diversity in some aspects, some parts of our armed forces were, I think you used the word ridiculous. There's a central issue here. Are we actually getting to grips with the bullying and the misogyny in our armed forces?
We're absolutely getting to grips with it. And one reflection of that is that as we get to grips with it, there will be the ugly stories about some of the things that have gone on in the past. And that's really difficult for all of us, difficult as senior leaders, but we're clear that we will support the people who in the past may have felt that they didn't have the confidence to make some of those complaints and those grievances, and now we're getting after it in a way that is much stronger than ever before. But we've also got to reflect that we are an organisation that looks to represent the whole of our society. Everybody that wants to serve in their armed forces should have the same opportunity, and it should be attractive for everybody across our nation. And if there are some barriers there where it's less attractive for some groups of people, then we're determined to overcome those. And then what we're saying, when you come into the armed forces, that whoever you are, whatever your background, you can give the best of yourself every day because you're doing this magnificent thing where you're putting on uniform and you're serving your country. And that's what we want to cohere around, and we want to ensure that that is the same experience for every individual in our armed forces.
Lieutenant Radakin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, plenty more from our panel. Plus, is Joe Biden really to blame for Kamala Harris's resounding defeat this week? We'll hear from the Democratic governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
The polls and pundits warned it would be a nail-biter. In the end, Kamala Harris quite convincingly lost. Her truncated campaign was a parade of celebrity endorsements, but ultimately the election was won by a simple slogan: Trump will fix it. And while he spends the next 4 years trying to do just that, the Democrats will hammer out where it all went wrong. Yesterday, I spoke to Phil Murphy, the Democratic governor of New Jersey, a state that voted for Kamala Harris on Tuesday. Governor, Kamala Harris did worse than Joe Biden did in virtually every state of the union. What went wrong?
Including, I might add, in New Jersey. A lot of people sat in their hands. There was a lack of enthusiasm, which frankly surprised me. But she her margins were 10 to 12 points lower than Joe Biden's margins were in 2020 across a whole range of states, including ours. Donald Trump ate into sort of traditional bases of the Democratic Party, Black, Latino voters in particular. He's a master at reaching in, grabbing grievance, pulling it out to his impact and effect, and he was really good at that, and that was the result.
There are various explanations being advanced now. Nancy Pelosi says that the result would have been different if Joe Biden had stepped aside earlier. Do you agree?
I think in a perfect world, you would have wanted a longer runway. Kamala, who I'm a big fan of, had a very short runway. Money wasn't the issue, but time, I think, was an issue. This is July 21st, which is highly unusual. You normally have a process that plays out for 12 or so months before that, and you had none of that. So I think in a perfect world, a longer runway would have helped.
Thinking about the campaign, do you think it was a mistake, whatever your view about reproductive rights, for the campaign to treat abortion as though it was as important an issue as inflation?
I don't know that I would argue with that, honestly. I think it is a huge issue, and we've seen it since the Dobbs decision. We've seen abortion and reproductive freedom play out very prominently in elections in America. I don't know that it's an either or. I think it's and both. Freedom and the economy, I think, can live side by side as important kitchen table issues. So I'm not sure I would necessarily have played that hand differently. Certainly the economy, inflation, affordability are huge issues for Americans, but I would argue so is reproductive freedom.
The most striking thing is that Donald Trump, as you're saying, has somehow managed to reach into places that other Republicans hadn't. Now, Jersey's, I think, broadly regarded as a kind of blue state, typically voting Democrat, or at the very least, it's a blue-collar state.
Yep.
And the thing that's really striking is Harris won this time only by 5 points compared to a usual double-digit lead, and she seems to have lost what we would call the working class. Is that right?
To some extent, yes. And New Jersey was not unique. New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Maryland, California, to pick 5 states that are very blue, if you will. The margins shrunk across those states anywhere from 10 to 12 points. In our case, 11. I don't know that that's a permanent shift. My gut tells me it is not. But it is a reality that this election saw a much tighter race in very blue states, and it's a reckoning for Democrats. It's a moment, it's a sobering moment to look in the mirror and figure out what's not working. Is it the message? Is it the messenger? Is it a combination of each? But a very sobering moment for our party.
It is a striking thing that the votes that the Democrats had always thought were sewn up, minorities, working class people and so on, deserted it. Some people say that part of the problem is that Democrats have adopted a tone of condescension, of arrogance. We know better than the ordinary working person.
Yep.
Does that resonate with you?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are several criticisms right now being launched against Democrats, and I assume each one of them has at least some amount of validity. Elitist, taking voting blocks for granted would be 2 of the big ones. We certainly haven't done that in New Jersey in our races. I'm proud to have won the African American vote 94-6 twice. So I don't think this is a permanent condition. But the other irony is Donald Trump, of all people, born of wealth, someone who's never lived in this. My dad didn't get out of high school. I had a very different upbringing than Donald Trump. To his credit, he's been able to tap into this which makes it even more frustrating, I think, for Democrats.
One of the things that could happen at the federal level, Donald Trump is promising tariffs.
Yeah.
Up to 60%, but at least 10% on export to the United States. First of all, do you believe him? And secondly, what impact would it have if he did do that?
Yeah, I think it's a very bad policy prescription. First of all, I'll answer the second first. And do I believe it? I'm not sure. I think if you and I were sitting and speaking about the People's Republic of China, I'd believe it. It's the one thing that unites, whether for good or bad, it's the one thing that unites Democrats and Republicans. I don't know that that makes sense, or even that he would pursue it against allies like the UK. My gut tells me no. But if I'm China, I'm fastening my seatbelt right now.
Okay. Do you think that there's, if you like, a lane that we, the UK, could pursue to make sure that we aren't caught in that hurricane?
I do think that. I can't speak for President Trump. He and I have a good relationship, which gets me no votes in my party, by the way. But it's true. He spends a good chunk of his year in New Jersey. He's got a home there. So I can't speak for him. But I have a gut feeling that he looks at the UK's move out of the European Union, which, by the way, I have to say was a huge mistake from my perspective. But from his perspective, I think it's, you know what? These guys had the courage to pull out of this big bureaucratic blob. And I, Donald Trump, have some sympathy with the renegade who has courage. I think there's some of that. I think that's a card that can be played, and we'll see.
That might benefit us if our Prime Minister was Mr. Nigel Farage, but unfortunately, from that point of view, it's Sir Keir Starmer.
But I've been able to find common ground with President Trump, and I'm a proud progressive, although I'm a cold-blooded capitalist, which is probably the part of me that President Trump resonates with.
We hear a lot about his deficiencies, the rambling speeches, the eccentricities, and so on. Tell me one thing that, in your relationship with him, you would say that's a good thing about Trump.
He's a very different guy privately than he is publicly. My wife and I went to see him after he was shot in July, and we spent some time with him in Bedminster, which is one of his homes in New Jersey. A very different guy than the guy you see out on that stage. On the stage, there's lots of insults, there's lots of big statements. In private, he's an energetic guy. He's in good form for a guy who's 78 years old, I have to say. I envy that part of him for sure. He's in very good shape. But he's a different person. So I just hope that private person is the person who's president of the United States and not the public person who says a lot of stuff that feels to me as very much un-American.
Governor, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse.
We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Let's check in with our panel one final time this morning. Jon Sopel, Christiane Amanpour and Fiona Hill are with me and being incredibly unruly.
Are we?
Surely not. Let's just go to, on Tony Radakin's interview, Fiona. It felt to me like there is a potential clash or at least some friction here between the military and the government coming over how much they're going to spend.
I mean, that's always the case, and that's because it's his job to get as much out of the government by way of money as he possibly can, and he has to do that. I think the more interesting point is how you spend the money. So there's a huge defence industry based on tech, which has actually come out of the invasion of Ukraine. And so all the tech geeks from California who were in different sectors have turned their attention to defence and what they can make by way of drones and so forth actually cost less money but are more effective. So I think the debate in the defence world right now is new technology, AI, space. I know I keep going on about space, but there's so much going on up there. So I think it's I think I'd rather focus on the changing technology rather than this 2.3% versus 2.5%. There's technology out there that gives you so much more for your money. Precisely. We all talk about this world of asymmetric wars, and that's true. I mean, you know, Putin uses immigration as an act of war. That's why he sends asylum seekers over the border of Norway and Finland. Okay. You know, and this is the world that we're living in now. It's no longer tanks and trenches. Okay. It's hostile state actors in elections. And it's all driven again by the new world order of AI, which will change everything.
Yeah. Jon?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right about all of that. But you're going to see awful lot of European leaders now who are going to think, I've got to impress Trump. And Trump likes numbers. Trump will want to see symbolic numbers of percentage of GDP being spent on defence and, you know, getting above 2%. And I suspect that, you know, in the back of Darren Jones's mind, who you had on the show earlier, he'll be thinking, yeah, we're going to have a problem with NATO, and therefore we've got to go show, look at how good we've been and what percentage we've spent.
Just one final point. NATO actually gets this. They have a thing called NATO Diana, which is completely focused on new technology, better pricing, more effective.
And dozens of them are now at 2.2%. So
Let's go back to the big figure at the centre of everybody's conversation right now, and trying to get inside Donald Trump's mind it's a kind of SAS exercise. But Christiane, last time you were on this programme, I was not hosting it. You did apparently, according to my colleagues, refer to Trump's Nazi talk.
Oh.
Yes, apparently, so I'm told. But anyway,
I referred to the quotations of it and what he said himself.
Yes, that's right. What do you expect? I mean, what's your feeling about
first of
what's
all,
gonna
I mean,
happen?
look, poisoning the blood of our citizens, that is what I probably was referring to, which he talked about immigrants. So can we just call a spade and just not be afraid to actually remember what exactly we're dealing with? And then we are going to see what Trump 2.0 is. But as Governor Murphy said, he said, look, he won decisively. And as you've mentioned, and we've all mentioned, he won all organs of government, not just, a red wall across the United States, but the Senate, probably the House, maybe he's dominating, or far right, I don't know how you want to describe them, but the Supreme Court. So, he also has survived, as some people have said. Look, he has been impeached, he's been convicted on 34 counts of felonies. This is the person for the first time in the history of the United States who will go into the White House. So he's survived all that. Hold on, he's survived all that, therefore feels that he has seen everybody else off.
Let me steer you all to that. Actually, the big question that's lurking here, if this person is as rebarbative and horrid and ghastly as everybody seems to be saying, how is it possible that the Democrats lost? And that's the thing that...
OK, so maybe it was because not in spite of, but because of those things. I mean, I think that actually the prosecutions, it made him seem more of a victim. It made it seem like more of the political establishment was against him. There is the mother of all post-mortems taking place in Washington right now about why Kamala Harris lost, and a lot of finger-pointing at Joe Biden. I believe it's going to become one of the great political scandals of our time about how the White House covered up the true physical and mental condition of Joe Biden for the 2 years before we saw him get on the debate stage at the CNN debate.
This is an interesting point, because I was very struck that not many people seem to be asking Kamala Harris, when did you know?
Well, the Wall Street Journal wrote a report saying there are really growing doubts about his mental agility and all the rest of it about 6-9 months ago, well before Joe Biden, and it was dumped on from a great height from some journalists and from White House staff, and it looks like it was real. I mean, I remember seeing Biden in 2021 at the G7 summit and thinking, he doesn't look great.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, but I think they lost because they weren't listening. And the reason that Trump won is because he listened to concerns of everyday people and he created a message machine around that, and he trotted those messages out over and over and over again. And here's the thing, that's how you win a campaign. And the Democrats instead rolled out the celebrities, which I always think is a bad mistake. And then we had Obama doing a big speech basically telling everyone how they should be voting. That is not the role of leadership. The role of leadership is to say what you think needs to happen in a country and then allow the electorate to make their mind. That is democracy.
So, to Jon's point, actually, if you look at the exit polls or the exit interviews, a lot of people said, including women, look, we may not like him, the person, but we decided to look across that because we were hurting economically. That is what won the election. And none of us really focused on the fact that 40% of the American people for at least a year have been saying that the country is moving in the wrong direction. Apparently, according to pollsters, no president, no incumbent has won with that level of dissatisfaction. And on top of that, look, it's very ironic. You talk to any economist, British, American, European, whoever, the Democrats actually legislated a lot for the working class. They weren't able to tell the story. Prices were still high. Inflation, however, has come down. Donald Trump has already as he did in his first term, has already suggested tax policies that will benefit the rich and the elite. So this is the reality, but he's got a more successful message.
He's got a more successful message, but that economic message, I think that he spoke to the aspiration of Americans.
He did.
He spoke to the idea that people wanted to one day be the millionaire who would benefit from it.
Americans don't mind people being rich.
Exactly.
Whatever you think of him, and this brings me back to what I said earlier about him being an emotional man, I think it's that emotional side of his personality that allows him to connect with people really directly. Whatever you think of him, he's got that skill. He is a communicator.
He had that visceral ability, and I saw it in 2016 in the 4 years I was in Washington during his presidency, to kind of have a sense of where the public mood was. He can smell the room. Whereas you felt with Hillary Clinton, it was all sieved and filtered, and it all came out a rather beige colour at the end of it, that Trump just had that feeling in his gut of where public opinion was. And he got it.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that he's smug?
Smug?
Smug. No, it's not a word I would use necessarily.
Exactly.
For him.
Smug is not the... OK, look, we will no doubt be talking about Donald Trump till the end of time, but just one quick thing. We're going to be going to Remembrance Sunday quite soon. Thing struck me. This morning, we're going to have 8 living ex-prime ministers on show. Never happened before. Fiona, what do you think's going on here? Did it matter?
I think we all know that it's because the Conservative Party had a succession of new leaders in a short space of time. I mean, yeah.
I first voted in the 79 election, and we had 3 prime ministers in 28 years, Thatcher, Major and Blair. 28 years. And in 2022, we had 3 prime ministers in 1 year. There's your answer.
One nerdy point. These 8 had an average of 4 years each between them. The previous 8 had 6 years, i.e. a Prime Minister today doesn't expect to be re-elected. Prime Ministers before could rely pretty much on being re-elected.
Or Liz Truss brought down the medium.
OK, that is it for this week's show. I've enjoyed this. I'll be back next Sunday at 08:30, but do stay with us for coverage of Remembrance Sunday.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.